Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on youth mental health. This is the Youth Programs Podcast. My name is Emmett. I'm a youth worker in the youth programs, and joining me today is...
I'm Matthew, and I'm a participant in the youth programs.
And I'm Darlie. I am the coordinator of the youth programs.
Welcome, guys. So what we're doing today is a part of our community perspectives on therapy, mental health. So what these things mean to you, how you deal with it, or how you approach these concepts in taking care of yourself. And just as a quick exclaimer, this is not a medical or psychological service. This podcast is meant to highlight how everyone deals with mental health issues, and that it shouldn't be stigmatized, and it should be talked about, normalized, and it's okay to talk about these things with whoever you have around. So with that being said, what does mental health mean? What is mental health? What do you think, Matt? Do you want to start off? Do you have some thoughts on it?
Well, whenever I hear the word mental health or what I think about it, it's just something you have to take care of. I mean, it's easier said than done, but I mean, it's just something that goes a long way. If you have a, well, it's not if you have if you have a good mental health, or I don't really know how to describe it.
It is it's something that's being talked about more and more as of late, and it's something that people don't exactly know what it is. You know, when you hear mental health, some people jump to, like depression, anxiety, things like that, like issues with mental health. But mental health in general, what do you think? Is there like a more general way to approach it, or do you think there's anything there?
I'm not even sure. What do you think, Darlie?
First, should we go and look up what is mental health?
Yeah, I think that might be a good...
Do you want to search it? And while I give some...
I'll do that now.
What it means to me, I think, again, mental health it goes hand in hand with your physical, your emotional health, and your wellness. And it's about your psyche. It's about the mind and what goes on in there, and how you perceive things, how you take things in, how do you deal. And again, everything is connected within the human body. So from your brain to your gut to your heart to your limbs, so everything has to be taken care of. Hence why it's important not to put stigma on it, because if your body's aching, you're taking care of that, and you have no shame saying that you're taking care of that. You know, if you're going through heartbreak, you say that. So if your mind is not right, and if something's wrong, it's important to say that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Matthew, what you were saying, the first thing you said was you got to take care of it, and you're absolutely right. It's something that, like what Darlie was saying too, just to go back to it, these things are all connected.
Terrible.
What happened?
No, the description that was given me on Google was horrendous.
Well, I think that kind of proves...
it's just it was super general. It wasn't that was it. It was just like...
Well, what did you read? What did it say? Ideas, broad stroke.
It says a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And then in a sentence says all this pressure seems to be affecting his mental health.
Mm-hmm. So, mental health is basically it's your mental headspace. What goes on, how you perceive things, how those perceptions impact you. It's everything, you know. But what you were saying, Darlie, about how it's all connected, you're absolutely right. And so you have to take care of your mental health to feel good physically, feel good emotionally. It's important to be in sync, I guess. Matt, do you have an experience with maintaining your mental health, or one of the first times you became aware, something, I do have a mental headspace, and it is something that needs to be maintained, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what was your first experience with mental health for yourself?
I mean, for me personally, I don't know. I can't even think of your first experience because I mean,
Not first, but
Well, yeah,
you
but
know,
like-
something. One of the first things that you remember, or something that comes to mind with mental health.
Do you want me to go?
yeah.
And then you can think about
Yeah. What about you, darling? Go ahead.
I think for me, well, first I think that everybody has vulnerabilities. Everybody at any point. I know sometimes when we use the term mental health or mental illness, because of the stigma and because it's taboo, people are afraid to voice or afraid to share whatever that means to them and how they're feeling or what headspace they've been in or what they're struggling in. But if you think of it as we've all been vulnerable in different situations throughout our lives. I don't know one human who has not been. So when you see it from that perspective, maybe it'll help a little bit, Matthew. It could be anything from like struggling in school and how that have affected like your peace, and also how you dealt with that stress. It's all falls under mental wellness and mental health. And I think it's important when we use term as mental health to think about like, recovery and to think about healing as well. For me, my experience, I've always been forthcoming. I suffer from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's depending on how things are going in my life, it's either heightened, really high, or it's low, that I'm able to self-regulate and self-soothe. So something as easy as, first, when you're not used to speak on things and you can't find the words to, which I'm not somebody that overshare or share with people. I have like a few people in my life, so I tend to keep things in and internalize. So when those things happen, you feel like you don't have an outlet of some sort, even though, sports, dance, and exercise, and writing and journaling, we say all those things, meditating. Yeah, they do help a lot, but sometimes it's a medical, I should say, condition and needs to be taken care of. So if I give like an example of my OCD, something as double checking things. And, people use the term OCD like it's a cute thing. Oh my gosh, things have to be, clean. I have OCD. No, it's a mental anguish. You know what I mean? To feel like you don't have control over what's going on in your mind. Like you have compulsion, hence why the obsessive compulsion. So I could be, if I'm in a heightened situation, like a stressful situation that's happening in my life, I'm double checking things that I shouldn't have to double check. But my mind is telling me something else. So I could be like leaving my house and checking, and I could be in the middle, like, walking and be like, and I have to go check again. You know what I mean? And I have to really talk myself down and really think about it and be like, no, you've done this, that, and that, keep going. And it's basically like a battle that goes on in my brain. So it's more than just like me having to wash my hands 15 times. I do that too. But it's also intrusive thoughts, right? To me, like with traumatic things that's happening, like, I had a lot of like death in my family early on in my life. So I think about death all the time. Not about like necessarily, not self-harming, not suicidal ideations, not that, but people close to me passing. You know what I mean? It's all related to some kind of trauma, right? When it goes unchecked. So, and when you have like an illness, for example, to me, like OCD, then it's like it keeps coming back. So I've known early on, since I was maybe 14, that, but I thought it was just, that I was quirky and different. And it has never like truly hindered me or crippled me until it did. And that's when it's like, whoa, if I don't take care of that, then I'm in trouble. So, yeah, I had to take a step back and be like, okay, things are, but again, when you're seen as the strong one and stuff like that, and I am able to deal until you can't anymore.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Darlie. I think you make an important distinction between medical, like having it diagnosed and needing to seek treatment for a mental health illness or disorder, and um, you know, going through a bout of depression or feeling sad, like just the everyday emotions that
Blues.
people go through. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, like a bout of depression was just an example, but the I guess like the best way to describe it is really like the everyday emotions and dealing with life for
Absolutely.
because, and to your point with the example of OCD, being able to just say like, oh, I have OCD because like I clean a lot or something, is different from the medical disorder and having to seek treatment. And in those instances, a lot of people say like, yeah, work out, exercise. I've said that on a previous episode of this podcast. Journaling, meditation, all that. Yes, it is helpful, but I think that you bringing this up now and making that distinction really highlights how there's no shame in going to seek treatment when you need treatment or at all, and there's no shame in admitting to yourself when you're feeling a certain way and trying to adjust and meet it somewhere, whether that be with exercise or art or however you want to deal with it. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that distinction of the actual illness against, uh, you know,
The blues, like,
yeah,
and the everyday feelings.
yeah,
Yes, it is important. Life is hard, and we have periods of our lives where it's not great. And when you honor your feelings, you honor all of them, right? It's normal to feel sadness and to feel hurt and pain and anger and all those good and also not so good feelings. It's when they persist and when you're unable to get out of the funk. That's when you're sounding an alarm, like, oh, okay, there's a problem there. Like, for example, I've never been diagnosed with depression, just because you tend to see life a certain way, and then going through different therapy session. I know that we'll talk about that after. You realize that it can be depression doesn't look the same to everybody, right? There are people that for them, they can't get out of bed, and that's how they are showcasing. Other people, they're functioning and going through life, and then you wouldn't think, and if they're wearing a mask, and this is how they are dealing with it. So when you realize that and you start reflecting, and you're like, oh my goodness, so maybe I was feeling some type of way. And also, I'm from like a culture where it's not something we talk about, because again, it could be from our ancestors and it could be from our elders. They've gone through a lot and they made it. So what is it that you can't go through? You know what I mean? You'll be fine. And where also religion plays a big part, in the sense, like, just pray. And sometimes you just can't pray the pain away, right? So when you think about those things, and especially for Black people and people of color of different, like, cultures who are struggling with these things, and they're being told with their family that's not how we deal with things, right? And it's something we've heard, and I'm gonna be like blunt, and they say like, that's the white man illness. That's not your illness. You know what I mean? And then when you think it, that's messed up, right? So oftentimes we're not given the space, to share those feelings. And also, when you're a woman or a female and you're automatically put into the caregiver role, there's no space for you to have those feelings, to really sit and be like, okay, how am I feeling? Let me check in. Am I just feeling the blues, or am I having a depressive episode? Or is there something else happening? We're not giving the space to do so. And also, when you have distractions, how many of you guys, that not only self-medicate, but also have so many distractions? To me, at the point, the self-healing thing, like journal, and then this. At one point, when they're being used as a distraction, you're like, is this helping you, or is this hindering you?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah, I get that. You can be using certain things to avoid actually dealing with the problem ahead of you. I mean, addictions exist for everything. There are people who are addicted to working out, who go to the gym like crazy, and yeah, I mean, it's very easy for something that can be relief or help you cope with something, or manage something, to become an escape and eventually abuse that thing. And I mean, working out is good. I'll use that example, and to think that you can abuse it is almost counterintuitive to what it's supposed to do. Like, what do you mean you're getting in shape, you're healthy? But absolutely, you can abuse everything, So
I mean, you can be in like great health, but I mean, your mental health can be terrible still.
Exactly.
100%.
And that goes back to what we were talking about just before in the beginning. Matt, were you able to think about an experience? Wow.
Yeah, well, Darla was speaking, actually,
Yeah.
One thing that, she actually made me realize that, I don't know, definitely one thing for mental health for me was school. I think that's probably, a big reason why I don't want to go back to school, because I don't want to go experience that stress of, handing in homework and
Performing, grades.
Oh, it's just terrible. It just reminds me of high school, and I just don't want to do that again. Yeah. But, I mean, I know, CJAP in college is something, a completely different experience, but, I mean...
Still stressful.
Exactly. Probably even more stressful, if anything, because, I mean, high school doesn't... I mean... No, doesn't really mean much now. It's just you got a high school diploma, whoop-dee-dee, obviously it's you're gonna need CJAP or even higher just for certain things you want to do, and it's just
yeah, Matt, that's a good point. When I was in CJAP in university, I know school was definitely my number one source of stress, and that's what made me realize when I'm during the semester, it's tough times. I was noticing okay, that's when I'm more stressed, more susceptible to be depressed or whatever. And then when the semester was over, it was okay. So school to me was always very stressful, because I mean, performing grades and what that means for self-image. If I don't get good grades, does that make me dumb? Whatever. When you're younger, you don't really think about grades not showing intelligence. But
yeah, I had a different. High school was not a source of stress for me. It was more like a refuge, and it was a space where I could just be. And I know I'm in the minority.
I guess you peaked in high school. This is
absolutely not. I did not peak in high school. I did not, because we know what happens to grown people that talks about high school. I did not peak. No, but I did not have. I had a wonderful high school experience. I had a great sense of self, and I know I've said that before. I always knew who I was. The person that's here, there was a different degree. And I think the stress was more, was it fitting in? I wasn't fitting in anyway. But the stress of the performance, now that I think about it, yes. I went to a very like, challenging, like, private school where you had to have the grades. So I think that carried me. What was stressful about, like, when I was young and it's more how to navigate different spaces as a young person. You know what I mean? When you see people doing things and you're like, how come I'm not doing that? Or why am I not experiencing that? Like, for example, like having intimate relationship, dating. I was not allowed to date in high school. So it was not even something I thought of, even though I wanted to. But it came like later on, the stress of that, because it's like you felt like out of place and you felt like you blossomed too late. That's when. So when it was time to socialize, that's where my level of stress and I guess anxiety came. And that was later on, like at 18, 19, when I went to CEGEP. It was like, okay, because you had people who had all these experiences and you were so late in the game. And when you always feel like you're late in everything, you kind of feel like, okay, so, the problem, it must be me. But, you learn.
That's another good point too, because we're talking about mental health generally and everybody's own personal mental space, and your experiences, whether they be traumatic or just your high school experience, whatever, informs to a degree the state of your mental health in the future. How you deal with those things, how they've impacted you, and how you respond to them is going to impact the person that you are. So with that being said, what do you guys think about therapy or ways to get professional help for your mental health? Matt, how have you thought about therapy? Like when it's talked about, what do you think about it when you hear about it?
I mean, I wouldn't think anything. I wouldn't think anything crazy about it. I mean, obviously you hear about like people going to therapy. It's like it's only for sad people or stuff like that, which is just like really dumb. But I don't know. I mean, I've never had a problem with it. I've never experienced therapy by myself because, I mean, personally, from my way of, like, coping or just getting, like, things off my chest, I would always talk to my friends. Like, I have my friends as, like, my outlet to speak on whatever. And, I mean, my sister she used to go to therapy at the Douglas. I mean, a lot of people, that building is stigmatized.
Absolutely.
That building is absolutely stigmatized because it's like, oh, that's where all the crazies go. But it's like, no, I mean, the Douglas does so much good. Like, my sister went there for depression, and someone I used to know, he was supposed to go, but then he moved he switched to a different spot because it was closer to him. But, yeah,
it's really common stigma. I mean, you hear it all the time. When I was growing up, that's what I always heard.
Whenever you hear the Douglas.
You're going to go to the Douglas. The crazies go, like, absolutely.
Which is such a shameful term, right? The crazies. Like, what does that even mean? But
it could be for literally anything.
Exactly.
I mean, by definition, crazy, insane just means having a mental health issue. So using those terms as a negative
connotation,
exactly,
it adds to the stigma and makes it even more taboo. Because that's why people don't want to come out and say that they have a problem, because they don't want to be labeled as such, right?
What about you, Darlie? How have you thought about therapy?
Oh my goodness,
I've
always wanted to go to therapy, and I always thought like therapy was like you coming in, you watch movies, you come in and you lie down on the couch and such, and you're like, start sharing. It's not that at all, guys. So I'm in therapy, and not been too long. Again, you grew up in a house, so it's not something that you talk about. But I know, like, 3.5 years ago, I started. It has been so interesting because it's nothing like you see on TV. It's so hard to find a good therapist, because it's something people don't think about, right? You go to therapy and you think the second that you have somebody, then that's it. No, it's supposed to be aligned, and they're supposed to have chemistry and a match with your therapist, or it's not going to work. You're not going to want to open up. And furthermore, if you have a chance to do so, to me, I wanted all these like criteria, requirements for me. And I was lucky enough that at least that person was a woman, a female, and that helped a lot. Because there's certain things, that you feel like maybe one person that may have things in common with you, they'll be able to relate. And there's a difference between like psychotherapy. There's like a psychiatrist, psychologist. It's so different, and you don't know. And there's like social worker. There's so many different things, and you have to find what fits for you. And then you have with the psychotherapy, it could be anything. You can go to therapy and you can be diagnosed with something, and then you have to go see another medical professional, right? Because maybe talk therapy won't work for you. So that's what I'm doing. But talk therapy, just like meaning like talking and having conversation and stuff, it's working for me in that sense, but that's not working for my OCD. Do you know what I mean? So there's so many different like avenues.
And there's layers to it. If you
Absolutely.
like talk therapy might work for one thing but not the other.
Exactly.
And that goes back to the distinction that you made before about having to be diagnosed and go to clinical treatment, get clinical treatment, and just feeling certain.
Absolutely. So I don't have I don't take medication because I don't need to be prescribed medication. But if people are, there's no shame in that either. And to find, it's expensive. I know many different places have a scale, and that can help. But, we wonder why people don't go to therapy every week. For example, I'm on a scale, but like it's $75, $80, and then my insurance doesn't cover it because it's psychotherapy and not psychology, right? So, and between like $70 to like $100 a session, who can do that every week in this economy?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
you have to spread that thing in case to me, in case I'm in crisis. That's when I'm like, hey, let me call my therapist, because it is expensive. And, we want to talk about like taking care of people and for people to take care of their well-being. But what happens when you don't have the means? When you're poor, we're all working poor. So what does that look like? Do I pay my rent or do I take care of my mental health? So
when you have rent, kids to take care of, maybe you're in school as well. Like you have not just the monetary, the money
the
associated.
time,
Yeah, the time, the stress associated. Like it's a lot. It's a lot.
And if I may, I don't want to take over the conversation.
No,
but when you're deciding to go to therapy, you have to be ready. And that's something I didn't think of. Because once your therapist start asking questions, you know what I mean? Are you ready to dig deeper? Are you ready to have those conversations? And you know what? I've learned that, we're all resilient, and we can all do hard things, but sometimes you may not be ready in that moment. So when you're bringing things your therapist, I could, for example, my therapist, I went for a specific situation that I needed, to be affirmed. I wanted validation. And Matthew, you mentioned that you're friends. And, friends are great, but sometimes friends, you don't want to burden them because everybody's going through something, right? So that's why it's so beneficial when it's a third party, somebody that doesn't really know you and able to give you perspective. And basically the therapist is there to guide you into making better decisions, and also to provide you tools so you can self-soothe, set self-regulate and also have those conversations within yourself. Be like, okay, where am I at and stuff like that. I'm talking about when you do not need medication, right? Because there's the other aspect of that. But yeah, you have to be ready. My therapist at one point was like, hey, let's go into your, in the past, how was your childhood? And I'm looking at her, it's like, whoa, doctor, that's not why I'm here.
Question.
I'm like, that's not why I'm here for. And she laughed and she goes, why are you here? I said, I feel like we've worked on that problem. And they're like, no, apparently you have other problems. And I was like, oh no, coming for me. So yeah, you have to be ready. And it is very taxing. It is emotionally, you will feel emotionally spent. However, if done right, with the right treatment, with the right service, and I cannot stress that enough, you have to find what works for you and your needs. And with the right medical professional, it can be a game changer. And the tools that it gives you, my goodness, it will definitely help.
Thank you for sharing that, Darlie. Everyone listening, I'm sure, will benefit from hearing your experience and how, just getting a bit more insight as to how therapy works, what the process is like. If you're in Quebec or Montreal, there are more barriers. If you're English speaking, there are more things to consider when trying to find mental health resources. And Darlie, you mentioned early that it was important for you to find another or a mental health practitioner that identified as a woman.
Yeah,
Yeah. So just
I also
to
wanted a
speak
black
on that.
woman.
Well, that goes into what I'm saying too. Just being able to connect with your therapist to have those open conversations, it would be more helpful to have someone who understands certain issues without you having to explain them already.
Yes.
That know certain things and the experience already. So
absolutely. Thank you for saying that, because that labor, it's like you're doing, not only you're coming in and you're having, again, my therapist is so she's trauma informed and so aware that it helped. That's why it's important, again, to the therapist and any medical professional to get much more training when it comes to diversify the language and also their spaces, because you go in having an issue, but we are not one thing, just as you two. There's so many layers to who you are. So when you come in with like your own baggage and you're sharing, I'm coming in, for example, I'm coming in as a woman, I'm coming in as a black woman, I'm coming in as so of like many different identities and such. So you want to be affirmed at every phase. So if you're like, yeah, I think this is because of that, you don't want somebody to dismiss that, because it's part of it. So I'm doing the labor of like, yeah, and stuff. So that's why a lot of people, they don't seek. They feel like, I had a friend who's like, they're not gonna get it. I'm 6'3", big dude, a black male, and they're not like Caribbean descent. They're not gonna understand. But I don't think that should stop somebody from seeking. Again, you have to keep searching and keep finding. I know there are resources for specific groups and such, and I know people that are like, in the like LGBTQ plus communities, what they're seeking as well. So yeah, it shouldn't. You just have to really do your research. And when you go have an initial meeting and you feel a discomfort, trust your gut and ask all the questions. They're here to work for you. So ask the questions, inform yourself, and keep looking and keep searching and such.
You mentioned a lot of important things. You mentioned knowing when you're ready, knowing this process requires knowing yourself, knowing what you're looking for as well.
Your boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to speak on those boundaries. I had to set boundaries with my therapist and be like, you know what? Today I can't talk about this right now. That's not where I'm at. and also I have to go to work after. So that ain't the move.
Right.
I need to be functional and be able to like serve the community and lead my team properly. So and express that. But if you can't have therapy, like Matthew said, talking to your friend, find your core people, find mentors, find like people within your community or family members that you trust, that see you, and that you're able to share. Because it's not, again, it's expensive. And if you're not ready for that, to do those things and to keep doing all the stuff that we talked about. I know before I kind of joked and said that they were distraction. At the time, they were distraction to me. But they are very important when done right. You know, the journaling, the meditation, the walks, the exercising, the music, the dancing. You know, anything that connects you to yourself, that makes you feel good, reading, whatever that looks like, hold on to that and keep doing that over and over until you have the means, until you have the courage and the time and the energy to pursue other healing avenues.
Yeah, that's great advice. For me, therapy was always framed. Matthew, you said it before, but it was always talked about like, oh well, you know, if you have a problem, you go to therapy. But everyone would benefit from going to therapy, regardless of if you think you have something that would be diagnosed, or even if you don't feel like you're feeling bad in any way. Everyone has experiences. Everyone has gone through life and had their own traumas or their own things to come to grips with. And having, like Darlie said, having a third party there to help you work through it, talk through it, it's all for you to help you understand, help you come to terms with it and continue to move on.
Would that be something that would interest either one of you?
What do you mean?
Therapy?
Therapy? Yes. For me, yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, based on what I just said, it'd be impossible for me not to. But, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I mean, I'd be down for therapy. I've thought about it before, but it's never, like, something I want to, like... Because, like you guys said, you don't have to go to therapy if you're not, like, I don't know, like, say, like... Not in, like, a certain, like, crisis, but, like, I don't know, like, there's a certain part in your life and be like, oh, I should go to therapy. It's just, I don't know, like, if I have the opportunity, I will.
Yeah. To me, it was preventative. It wasn't like it wasn't to fix anything. It was to prevent. I saw myself being consumed by something, and I had other responsibilities and role that didn't permit me to go under. So in order to prevent that, I said, hey, let me try it out and get some help, whatever that looks like. And again, to me, it was talk therapy, and that has been working well. But if I'm going to be transparent, for my OCD, I might need something else. It could be talk therapy, but at a different level. So I'll keep y'all posted.
It's a common theme that I'm starting to notice because there were other guests who mentioned this. Whenever either there's a bad time at home or at school or whatever, they'll remove themselves from that space and they'll come either here to the community center or they'll hang out with friends and talk with them. That's I don't want to say it's therapy, but it is a form of self-help and recognizing
Absolutely.
What you need.
There's like, yeah, absolutely. That's community. That's community care.
Exactly. So with all that being said, I think we talked a lot about what mental health is from a general standpoint. Everyone has their own mental headspace that they need to maintain and take care of. And therapy and mental health resources are a way to connect with a professional who can give you the care that you need properly. There are other things that can help you out, like self-regulation, doing, like we talked about it, art, journaling, exercise, whatever, breath work, breathing. That helps, but sometimes you need a bit more when there's a crisis or an issue that is persistent and it's been around for a while. So hopefully, with all this being said, you know more about what mental health is. Maybe you're asking yourself, well, what does my mental health look like? And those are questions that you can ask yourself and figure out for yourself and just be conscious of. And thank you, Darlie, for being on this episode, because having your perspective as someone who has gone through therapy and is still going through therapy and knows that it can be challenging to find the right therapist and jump through all the hoops of getting signed up and all that. It was a valuable perspective to have on this episode. So thank you
for having me, Matthew and Emmett. I feel like I was so nervous. I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so raw. But I think the work that this series doing, it's going to be beneficial and impactful. So it's just like, sharing stories, right?
Right.
So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thanks, Matt.